when Keller was awarded that, they announced that he was going to be awarded the Kuiper Award for Public Engagement for Christianity in 2017. I mean, Princeton threw a fit.
It didn't go too good, did it?
No, I mean, they're like, this guy is a bigot. He hates women, right? Because he's a complementarian.
Yeah.
And he's anti-abortion. So he's inflicting violence upon on the oppressed or whatever.
Yes.
And so they forced the Kuiper Center to restrict that and rescind that. And I'm like, look, if Keller can't do it anymore, if it doesn't work for Keller, I don't want to say this is not pragmatism. It's helpful contextualization, which I learned about from more than anybody from Keller. So I just want to know what context we're in and where a certain approach might be less fitting.
On the word of God, I will build my house. I will build my house.
Welcome to Grounded. I'm Steve Hartland, pastor. And our topic today is second thoughts about the Winsome approach to cultural engagement. Or, if you want to make it sound really clever, second thoughts about third-wayism. All right, so there we go, second and third. And I have a guest today. His name is James Wood. Let me give you a little bit of bio on James before we actually introduce him and you get to see him. So he is assistant professor of theology and ministry at Redeemer University. That's in Ancaster, Ontario. Yes, Canada. And he just recently successfully defended his dissertation, his PhD dissertation, so he is soon to be PhD in hand. I think that'll be, they make you wait and sweat a while, don't they? It'll be, what, May or something? From the University of Toronto, that PhD. So, hello, James. How are you?
I'm good. Glad to be with you.
Thank you for being here, man. So, a little bit more bio. Like, are you married? Do you have family? Do you have some kids? What's going on there?
I am married. Been married for, I guess we're coming up on, I think, 15 years this year.
Sounds like real numbers.
Yeah. We've got 4 little kids, 4 girls, ages 7, 6, 4, and 2. So we don't sleep much, but we have a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah. Just incidentally, just so you'll know, so my wife and I have been married 47 years, brother.
All
That's
right,
gotta be real
congrats.
numbers. And we're up to, grandchild number 13 has just been announced, on the way, in the womb, growing.
All right.
So pretty cool. They're worth waiting for, let me just tell you, grandkids.
I hear it. Yeah, I hear it's pretty great. So we've been, so we now live in Canada. You know, I did my doctoral work here. And now working here as a professor, but spent most of my adult life, pretty much all my adult life in Austin, Texas, where I was a PCA pastor.
Texas to Canada. Woo.
Yeah.
That's a switch.
Yeah, so I'm kind of a second career switch. I was a pastor first and campus evangelist in the ministry of Crew.
You were in Crew?
Yeah, then PCA pastor, and then I thought I was going to do pastoral ministry for a long time, but was heavily encouraged to look into doctoral studies, and that's where the Lord brought me. And
pretty
so
awesome, man. PCA pastor. Way to go. Almost there. Reformed Baptist. Anyway, we're close. So today we're talking about third-way winsomeness and an alternative to it, really. So I want to get you talking fast here. So I'm just going to ask you, get us started, please. A lot of people listening don't know the answer to this question. So what is third-way winsomeness? And that kind of implies, then there must be a third way and there must be a second way. What are they? So fill us in, would you?
Yeah, and so I'll say from the outset that the two terms that I've kind of ended up doing a lot of critique of are winsomeness and third-wayism, and I'll say from the outset I'm not absolutely opposed to either of them in their best iterations. I think there's something right captured in both of them, but I think they kind of go off the rails a little bit by the most prominent advocates, and so as I've watched them apply that model, it increasingly made me critical of it, and so had some questions. Okay, so what are they? Well, I use this as kind of a package, this catch-all labels to describe the package approach to cultural engagement that I say, in summary form, seeks to minimize offense, above all, to minimize offense to maximize openness to the gospel message. Okay, so that would definitely be winsomeness. And we can discuss some of the biblical imperatives that are very much that inspire and are behind winsomeness. And those biblical imperatives can never abandon. But FYI, if people don't know this, the word winsomeness isn't in the Bible. That's okay. The idea could be. You could make that argument, just like the word Trinity is not in the Bible, yet the idea is. But at least it should kind of humble you and relativize its level of importance of like, look, if it's not in the Bible, then if somebody critiquing it should not be totally out of bounds. Okay, so that's one thing. That's winsomeness.
Right.
But we can talk about the imperatives that you can't ever abandon. But okay. But third-wayism definitely isn't in the Bible. But there's something true about third-wayism. I think in its best iterations, third-wayism is kind of built on the idea of like Christianity is neither left nor right? Like it's neither conservative nor Republican. It's you don't worship the donkey or the elephant. Okay, great. I absolutely agree with that. If anybody, I'm more conservative. That's I don't hide that. But if anybody thinks that I'm just all in on the Republican Party and want to get a speaking, engagement at CPAC or something, they're entirely wrong. I have a lot of criticisms of the contemporary GOP. So there's something right about that. It's trying to avoid uncritical partisanship and kind of toxic tribalism where you kind of subordinate the faith to partisanship. And I think that that's right. That's good. Yet my problem is it often leads to sort of like kind of arbitrary expectation of constantly balancing between the positions. And what I say kind of leads to a lot of times false moral equivalencies. Like you're like, look, I mean, we can't, if we're going to speak about abortion, why don't we also speak about like something like idolatry? I mean, so Tim Keller is the most prominent advocate, of this model. And I think he's the best. So like, I've been very, very clear. Like, I think he's much more thoughtful than a lot of his acolytes are.
And I know that you have quite a bit of background with him. You've been a strong admirer. You were probably situated in that category of believer for quite a while. So just so our listeners know that you've been there.
I could give a little bit of background on that and come back to my concern, ways where I feel like he does with a little bit on certain statements, but also more how the disciples do, I think. But yeah, so Keller is a huge influence on me. The reason I was asked to write this article, I never intended to. I was just working at First Things, and I was having lunch with Rusty Reno, the head editor there, and I was like explaining, like, hey, a lot of guys like me, we're in New York, so Keller's kind of in the background here. A lot of guys like me really looked up to him for a long time and kind of followed his model for cultural engagement, really, but have had some questions over the years, like whether or not it's the most fitting for our context, whether there's some limitations to that. And I was like, yeah, and I've had some questions. I've kind of shifted. I haven't really looked to him as much, though I really respect him. And I was like, but I mean, I've respected him so much. I named my dog after him. I told him, and I was like, my dog's named Keller. And Rusty, when I told him that, Rusty was like, you have to write this article. And I was like, oh my gosh. Okay. So he's like, that's the perfect way to start an article. And I'm like, and so it was never like an intent. It just kind of fell into my lap. But yeah, my 13-year-old dog, who just passed this summer.
I'm sorry.
He passed right after the article came out, which was kind of strange. He had a great life with us. But his name was Keller. My wife and I fell in love reading Reason for God when it came out in 2008, which I still think is maybe Keller's, I don't know. I go back and forth. Reason for God, Prodigal God are really, I think, his two best books, in my opinion. Prodigal God is where he really articulates his kind of he kind of provides his kind of creative exposition of the gospel, is kind of avoiding the two ditches, right? Which then gets to the neither left nor right thing, which we could talk about. And I actually gave the book Prodigal God to all my groomsmen in my wedding. I mean, so he's had a profound impact on me, and I still really admire him. And so I very much, even as we go on in this conversation, you very much hear I'm not trying to dump on Keller. So,
right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll pause on that. Yeah.
All right. So what's the first way? What's the second way? What's the third way? What's winsomeness? Or what's wrong? Like, what could be wrong with winsomeness, right? Well,
the three ways. I mean, in this recent article in American Reformer, where I do provide some more constructive vision proposals for kind of what I think this model might be missing or what might be downplayed in it. I do talk about what I call prodigal politics as a new term I've introduced. And that's because the people who follow Keller's model, here's a couple things that start to happen, I think, is they'll do this, they'll look at the Prodigal God exposition, which is really interesting. You've got the two ditches represented by the two sons, the one son, the kind of relativistic immorality over here by the younger brother, the kind of moralistic religiosity by the older brother. And if you read that parable in Luke 15, it looks like, okay, look, the harshest words are directed towards the elder brother, the one who's kind of the rule follower religious type. What happens then a lot in our like cultural engagement in politics, then that gets applied as like, well, the people we need to be most critical of are the people on the right, because they're the ones, the political counterpart to the elder brother. And they're the ones who are moralistic. They're trying to impose kind of a moral vision on, and on the populace in kind of a sort of like oppressive authoritarian way. And so, okay, so I have questions about that for our contemporary moment. Maybe I'll hold off on that. But you asked how does this approach go wrong? Well, two things just maybe here from the outset, and we can keep expanding. I think that this approach goes wrong, first of all, by creating a lot of false moral equivalencies, which I said, when this was unfortunate for my piece came out, basically, they were holding on to it, I think, for the opportune moment at first things. And the opportune moment was when Dobbs, the Dobbs decision was released, and Keller had just a few days before Dobbs, and I think this is unfortunate timing for him, he had released a tweet thread. And he's like, why do we care so much about basically making abortion illegal? We don't make other things illegal. Like we don't make idolatry illegal. And that's right. I think you get into all these kind of weird conundrums of moral reasoning there. Like, why are we, of course we don't make people's like internal thoughts of idolatry illegal. But if your idolatry gets expressed in like sacrificing your children to Moloch, we do. And that's what I would understand abortion to be, right? I mean, you do legislate against public vices that are socially destructive and harmful to others. I mean, you don't legislate against all private vices that, don't seem to flow out.
Everybody would be dead.
Yeah, I mean, right. So that's people say like the whole common trope, like you can't legislate morality. And my response to that is always, I don't know what else you legislate.
There's nothing else.
Yeah, and so that's what you legislate. Maybe like you could make some caveat for like tax codes or something, but even that's informed by some moral vision of. And so anyway, so it gets in, and so it's just I think unfortunate for Keller. I think that logic is not airtight, and I think that shows kind of these false moral equivalencies. And it also leads to, like, I think, an unwillingness to acknowledge and publicly acknowledge and recognize the fact that there can be asymmetry among the various sides in our political contemporary politics, and even an asymmetry among the issues themselves, right? So, like there are certain moral issues that are, first of all, more clear from Scripture. Like your position on abortion. You will get a clearer position on abortion from Scripture than you will on like a total economic position on economic policy. I mean, there are certain things that you'll pull out about economics from Scripture, but it's really complicated how it applies to modern societies. So I'm sorry that just is going to be the case. I can say we shouldn't kill babies. I don't know exactly how much we should tax people.
Or how many immigrants we should allow in a given month.
Yeah, we should care about the refugee, but okay, so what does that mean? And exactly at a policy level, that's up for debate. But saying we should not kill babies, that's not. I really don't think that's up for debate. So there are some issues that are just simply more clear from Scripture and more important in our politics. And I think, and also there are some sides. We should be able to say that some sides are doing more evil, are promoting more evil than the other. And so I'm not a hardcore Republican, but I do think the contemporary Democratic Party has shifted to radical positions. They're like, I think, so one of your questions, I know we were talking about, was winsomeness more appropriate at a former time? I think a lot of people who still appropriate this model think that we're living in 1995 or something, when like you could still be a pro-life Democrat, and you could still believe Democrats wanted abortion to be safe, legal, and rare, and that they would oppose same-sex marriage and things like that. I mean, Joe Biden did,
Yes.
But now the Democratic Party is, they're pretty committed to a radical abortion agenda. Even Joe Biden's tweets this last week, he made it very clear, like the Republicans want to end abortion and Democrats want to codify Roe v. Wade in the nation. And also, all of the radical gender ideology that is being pushed on kids in schools. And so I think we're just not living in 1995 anymore. We are in a different era. And so to act like the Democratic Party is kind of what it was under Clinton, I think is naive. So, but also where does all this approach go wrong? So I think it leads to sort of naivety and kind of false moral equivalencies and all of that. But also, I think it just winsomeness often translates into niceness. which I think is a sentimentalized reduction of the biblical moral vision. I don't think it has to, but I think that is a common tendency.
You've heard
And so,
you know Vodi Bakum, and you've heard him talk about the new 11th commandment is just be nice.
yeah, I mean, I think you could, if you just like polled people on the street of like what they thought Christianity's basic moral principle would be, I think they would just be like, yeah, it's you got to be nice.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think like, I'm not advocating for being a jerk for Jesus. I'm just saying if you do truthful love in our increasingly post-Christian society, no matter how nice you package it, that truthful love is going to be received as unloving and unwinsome.
Yes.
No matter how, and that's just why, like, okay, I signal in my first things piece that I do think that 2017 situation with Keller was really fascinating. It was telling. Like, you're not gonna be more winsome than Tim Keller. I'm sorry. Like, he's the best. Like, he's very intelligent. He's very well read, and he's very nice. And at Princeton, and it's interesting. I ended up doing a THM at Princeton in 2018 at Princeton Seminary. At Princeton, they're kind of loosely affiliated with the Abraham Kuyper Center, and the Abraham Kuypers they do deliver their annual. They have their annual conference there where they hand their Kuyper Award for public engagement out at Princeton, even though it's officially like a Princeton organization. But when Keller was awarded that, they announced that he was going to be awarded the Kuyper Award for public engagement for Christianity in 2017. I mean, Princeton threw a fit.
It didn't go too good, did it?
No, I mean, they're like, this guy is a bigot. He hates women, right? Because he's a complementarian.
Yeah.
And he's anti-abortion. So he's inflicting violence on the oppressed or whatever. Yes. And so they forced the Kuyper Center to restrict that and rescind that. And I'm like, look, if Keller can't do it anymore, if it doesn't work for Keller, and so this, I don't want to say this is not pragmatism. It's helpful contextualization, which I learned about from more than anybody from Keller. So I just want to know what context we're in and where a certain approach might be less fitting. And so I do think this approach is a little bit less fitting because I don't think it works like it used to. And I also think it has dangers and I think it forces us to mute some of the harsher edges of the scriptural vision.
That's a good example of a danger. So would it be appropriate to say, would you agree with this, that there was a time when maybe the winsome approach, you could nice your way, you could winsome your way through differences with non-Christians and so on, and maybe they'd respect you and they'd like you, but those days are pretty much past, and now you can't winsome, you can't nice your way through what's going on in the nation now. Does that sound right?
Yeah, and obviously this is going to be the kind of post-Christian or the entrance into negative world is unevenly distributed, right? Like, so like if you're in small town Texas, being a good conservative Christian still might go a long way, and you can kind of have dialogue with people who come from different persuasions. And okay, so we have to acknowledge different contexts. But I would say like. So like David French doesn't like anything I say. And
I want to come to him in a minute. So go ahead.
So he, his first hit back on me was like, well, I was in Harvard in the late 90s or something.
Yeah,
and
I read that.
And it's like, well, yeah, dude, but like the rest of society wasn't like Harvard in the 90s. And the rest of society is much more like Harvard in the 90s now. We always thought like the whole joke of like these radical left kids like in college, like they're just going to leave that when they go into the real world, right? Quote unquote. Instead, they've remade the real world according to their, what was it, Jonathan Haidt or whatever, like, or maybe it was Eric Kaufman or somebody, one of these one of these figures who's like, look, we're all on campus now, right? Or that was Andrew Sullivan.
Yeah, campus spilled out into the whole country, didn't it?
Yeah, the whole world is the campus now, and the whole culture is, and so I think that stuff might have worked a little bit better in a former time when, there's big debates on Wren's taxonomy, but I do think Wren, his whole three worlds thing has been kind of helpful just for the average person to kind of put some terms on something that feels like it has shifted beneath their feet in the last decade.
Yeah, it really has.
I think a lot of people have felt that. And so people can critique all day long and Wren's thing and be like, oh, it's imprecise. And be like, okay, but then you come up with something better because your average person just feels like something is different. And in a former age, it did feel like you could be, a traditionalist Christian, and you could hold these positions. In a former age, that actually was a social benefit to you. Okay, I've never grown up in that. My whole life has not been in that, so I'm not used to that. At a certain point in my life, it felt like, okay, it was just kind of eccentric and strange. Okay, whatever, you do this, I do yoga, and I'm a vegan, so whatever. It does feel like now, like, no, like if you hold to these biblical truths, you're actually a bigot, and like you're doing harm to the social order. And that does feel different. So anyway, I'll stop there.
Yes, I'm old enough to have lived in all three of those. So for our hearers who might not have been familiar with Nathan Wren's taxonomy, what was it? It was positive world, neutral world, and now negative world. Positive world, and I was there. I became a believer in 1971 when I was 17 years old, and it was very definitely a positive thing to be a Christian. If you wanted to run for high office, it would help you if you could say, I'm a Christian, you're seen carrying a Bible and whatnot. Then there was neutral world where, it might be okay with some people, not okay with other people. But we're in negative world now where if you say, I'm an evangelical, that's negative. You're probably not going to become a professor at Harvard. You're probably not going to be, the leader of some Silicon Valley organization. You're probably not going to be voted into high office. So that's the negative world that we're in. And the idea here is that in negative world, you just can't be nice enough for them to like you. In fact, so on to David French. He seems to say, these are my words, like, let's be nice to them and give them space in the culture, and then they'll be nice to us and give us space in the culture. So if they want to have men in funny little suits dancing for kids in the library, let them do that. There's not that many of them doing it anyway. And then they'll be nice and let us do things. Is that working? What's your opinion on that?
Well, no, it didn't work for Keller, as I mentioned. So that's one case. But the other case is like we moved quickly from let us get married, right? Leave us alone. How is this going to affect your marriage? To bake the cake, bigot.
Yes. Now you must affirm us.
Yeah, Carl Trueman is extremely helpful here, right? Mm-hmm. So go read Carl Trueman's last couple books of like, look, and he's building on Philip Reeve, Charles Taylor, Alistair McIntyre, all these major thinkers of like, look, we are in the age of authenticity where like your internal morals, your internal self needs to be publicly affirmed. Mm-hmm. That's what people feel. And so like for me to say like, okay, you can live your life, but like, I disagree with you, and like, but no, like I have to affirm it, like, and so that's why all the push for pride stuff, right? Like you've got to put your flag up, you got to show your pride support, and so you're not just going to be left alone. And Aaron McIntyre is an interesting online figure. He'll be like, the side who wants to win will always beat the side who wants to be left alone. Yes. And so you have to, and Matthew Peterson's really great on this. Like you have to combat a positive with a positive. You can't combat a positive with a negative. And so the live and let live, leave alone just isn't going to work. And so the let us get married to bake the cake bigot is one example. And David French is just really insensitive to the whole Jack Phillips situation. I mean, like Jack Phillips is still facing legal stuff today. I mean, like, and the whole like process is the punishment. Even if he got exonerated at a certain point, like he won the case after 10 years, his whole life has been turned upside down. The process is the punishment, and it's a message to everybody else, right? Like, step out of line. If you don't bend the knee, you will be beaten down.
We'll hurt you. That's right.
And so not only this, but you also saw, what was it, Vanderbilt last week, right? Where it's like, to the whole, like, we've moved from call me Caitlyn Jenner to castrate those kids or you'll lose your job as a surgeon.
Man,
right? Like
in a very short amount of time too.
Yeah. And so that whole idea of like, okay, just give them some rights or whatever and
share the space.
We'll live and let live. That's not going to happen. Yeah. And so, one last thing about this is like one of the great blessings of the Great Awakening, for instance, and I've written about wokeness and many others have obviously, is it put to bed the lie of a neutral public order. Like it showed that like, look, neutrality was never possible, really. It was only imaginable with the residue of Christendom, when people generally still kind of held like, some basic moral principles from Christianity. But a neutral public order is never really possible. And people hunger for a moral vision to inspire the public order. And the Great Awakening revealed that, like they're hungering for something to say this is good and this is right. And so that actually provides opportunity for us as Christians, like, yes. And so now how do we enter into that space and try to articulate a very thickly Christian version?
Yeah, very good. Hey, you write and speak about third-wayism tends to view, it doesn't tend to, it views politics through the lens of evangelism. Would you talk about that? What do you mean by that? What is that?
Yeah, and so, you asked earlier, was there a time where this was more appropriate? And I do think that there was a time where this whole approach made a little bit more sense, and you could argue that. That's very contestable on all of that. Mm-hmm. But I think the one thing that I've increasingly come to realize that is something that is a critique that I have that is contextual, that it's not dependent on context, is that I think this whole approach, Winsome third-wayism, the way it approaches politics is basically always misguided. Because the idea that, like, and you see this, what I mean by that, politics through the lens of evangelism, is you see this from the types like Russell Moore types and others, of like how you vote. Like when Donald Trump was elected, and that 81% number, right? And how that got weaponized forever. It's like, look, 81% of white evangelicals voted for Trump. So that means we've totally discredited our public witness. Mm-hmm. And that was the encouragement from the Russell Moore types throughout that whole process. And again, I didn't vote for Trump, so this isn't a self-justification of me. I think that is bad logic. It's bad moral reasoning. It's bad political reasoning. It's like, we just shouldn't be thinking so much about our voting as an evangelistic affair. That how I vote is going to undermine our ability to share the gospel with others, because we need to be thinking about politics. Politics is about how we order our common life together, and it's focused on the things like justice. And so I want to say, like, look, I'm a conservative Christian, and I think a lot of the conservative positions are very much a better reflection of justice. And so I want to fight for a just social order, and like, it's okay if my neighbors disagree with me, but I can't hamstring that pursuit of justice because I'm worried that they then might not be open to the gospel.
Yes.
I think that's just a category error. Because also, first of all, you don't even know, by the way. Like, you don't know. Like, we don't know what 10 years from now people are going to look back and be like, hey, who fought against abortion? Like the whole abortion industrial complex. Who was there saying no to that madness? Who was there fighting the trans craziness on kids? Like, for instance, I wonder, one of the things I've brought up recently is like, where are the detransitioners going to turn later? And who are they going to call out for being silent? Right? Like, there might be evangelists, even if you wanted to think evangelistically, I think this is a bit naive in the way that it holds back real conservative efforts that are good. So, so think about justice not through that. Think about it not through evangelism. Think about it as the pursuit of justice.
Yes. You just reminded me, you mentioned Carl Trueman and his writings, one of which is The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. And in that book, he suggests that there might be children suing their parents in the future.
Oh, I totally agree.
Why did you do that? Why did you allow me to do that? Why did you let the doctors do that? You never know.
You never know.
You're trying to play along, and this is going to be good for the gospel. And it turns out later they're like, you're the one that should have been telling me this is wrong. Why didn't you? Or it might be, you're the one who told me this is wrong, and that's what ultimately led me to Christ. So
that's right.
Yeah.
There's a great, in my recent essay, Sheep, Wolves, and Fools, which provides some positive views of ministry. I refer to a great Gospel Coalition article a few months ago about a person doing exactly this, talking exactly this, about who was a detransitioner and basically told his friend who was a pastor, like, please just keep telling people the truth, even if they won't hear it right away. Like, and this person turned back towards the church because that pastor was doing that.
Yes. Yeah, amen to that. Hey, talk about this phrase. Did you coin this phrase? Who did coin this phrase? That if you're a third way, nuanced person, you tend to punch right and coddle left. What's that about?
Yeah, I did not coin that phrase. I have no idea who did.
All right, it's a good one.
But it's so obvious. I mean, and I really don't know that many people who would try to actually argue against that is what a lot of these figures do. And I don't like to do the Bulverisms of like trying to get into people's motivations, and intentions too much. I think I try to avoid that. But I do think that is misguided. But so what does punch right, coddle left mean? It means like, okay, so a lot of these pastors and Christian public figures, and through social media, in their newsletters, all of that, it seems like they're willing to be very nuanced to the left, to developments on the left, and give them the benefit of the doubt and the most charitable reading. and any developments to their right, they quickly denounce, and they're quick to discredit, and they're quick to distance themselves from, and it seems very disproportionate and asymmetrical. And I think it's wrong. If I was being cynical about their motives, it does seem like they're trying to cozy up to secular elites. That would be one. That could be one suggestion. Also, that
Get
maybe
their articles published in the secular elite publications and stuff.
that's right. Yeah. If you want to get in the Atlantic or the WAPO or the New York Times, one of the as a evangelical, one of the easiest paths to do that, right, is
Punch right.
To punch right. I mean,
I'm a Christian, but I'm not that kind of Christian.
Yeah, and so I really hate that idea generally, in a sense of like, I have a great aversion to that posture that you just mentioned, because I care so much about church unity. I really do. I care about unity among the brothers, even those who I might really disagree with and find less reputable in society. Like, I don't want to quickly be like, oh, I'm not the. It's like the whole trying to avoid the charge of being a fundamentalist. Like, we're not those fundamentalists, and it's like, okay, like, but some of the fundamentalists might be really good people just trying to figure it out, right? And like,
yes.
And so why am I so quick to dump on them, right? And like Paul said, like, when he was Christians came to him like, these people are preaching from all these bad motives or whatever. He's like, however Christ has preached, he's preached, right? He wasn't quick to dissociate from them, right? And so I experienced this as a campus evangelist when like street preachers would come and they would do stuff that I would never do. And they would, preach hellfire and brimstone. And I disagree with that approach in many ways. But I was when my students would come to me and like, what do you think about that? I had to fight internally to be like, oh, but we're not like them, because I think that's really arrogant. Anyway, so if I was being cynical, that could be something you'd read between the lines. But I also think like if I'm being more charitable but still disagree, I think they think that is maybe the best way to influence the culture, is to cozy up to that. And maybe they still think that it's the religious right who's still being the most imposing upon society on an unwilling populace, their moral vision. And I think Nate Hockman had an amazing piece in New York Times this summer called "What Comes After the Religious Right" or something like that. And he's like, look, who is the group today? So yeah, maybe the moral majority in like the 80s and early 90s, that was the group that was very much trying to push their vision on society and really had the power to maybe do that. Well, who is the group that is doing that today? It's not the religious right. It's the social justice left. And so like, if you're actually trying to speak to people who feel oppressed by this imposing moral vision, even evangelistically, I think you're missing opportunities to catch what I call to minister to the refugees of the woke and sexual revolution.
Talk about that some, would you? Because I really like that.
Yeah, I just think
the idea of the refugees. Who are they? What do you mean by that? And how we might minister to them?
Yeah, so we're in a time of profound moral insanity, right? I mean,
Amen.
Our social mores are shifting at breakneck speed just constantly, and people can't keep up, right? I can keep up because I'm in the academy. Like, if I wanted to play that game, I could do it because I know how everybody's talking. I know what's like bad to say. I know what shibboleths you need to avoid and all of that, But the average person, they can't keep up. And the whole rise of cancel culture, and you get canceled for things that 5 minutes ago were pretty innocuous, right? And so, but also like we're just in insanity. Like, we can't even talk about fundamental realities, like what a woman is. So the Matt Walsh phenomenon, like that movie, I don't have like, I've never really followed Matt Walsh closely. He's not a person that I've necessarily tried to pattern after, model my own approach after. But it was a great cultural phenomenon to realize like why so many people were moved by his film. Had a huge
the desire to see that film led me to pay for getting the Daily Wire, and in fact, I had to go out and buy an Apple TV, the little puck, so that it would all work on my TV, and that, so I could hear that one movie.
Because like, why I just think that people are like, why is we can't even define what a woman is anymore? Like, I mean, and so I think
what are the refugees from
those are the refugees are feeling confused, and they're feeling not only confused, but kind of beaten up. They're being called bigots for affirming basic truths, right? Like, because they're not willing to say birthing person, or whatever. And I think they're looking for someone to speak sanity into the moment. And I think the Christian should be most well positioned to do that. And so I think there's some evangelistic opportunities that we're missing if we don't do that, and we just think about the lost in terms of secular leftist elites, and not also these people who are feeling beat up by the moral insanity that's being pushed on them by those secular leftist elites.
Yes.
And so, and I do feel like, just to be one comment about that, is I do think the Winsome Third Way model does off. It's like seeker friendly for urban elites, and that's why it worked well in Manhattan in many ways for a long time, and urban church planters really appropriate it. But there's a lot of people in just middle America that feel like they're getting beat up even by some of these pastors who do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I just think it's kind of like how Paul went to the synagogues, right, in his missions. And like, who are the God-fearers also? Who are the God-fearers today? And in what way can we or who are the reality recognizers, at least? People who still believe that reality is a thing. And so maybe we should be focusing more of our evangelistic posture towards the God-fearers and reality recognizers, and not just the urban elites who hate Christian moral norms.
Who aren't ready to listen anyway, are they?
Yep.
Yeah. Hey, here's a change of topic. So let me ask you this. So you've talked about this recently, I think. I've heard you talk about it. So Jesus sometimes mocked the opposition. Sometimes he made caricatures of, like, you strain out a gnat and you swallow the camel. So that may be acceptable. It may even be helpful. Is it ever right for us to do that? Oh, why would we want to do that? What good can it do?
Yeah. There's a big debate about this right now, right?
Yes.
And to be honest, like, I'm a strange person to enter into this, because I actually don't do a lot of mockery. You said you follow me on Twitter. I actually don't. I think it's actually pretty hard to do.
You're right.
Mm-hmm. I think it's pretty hard to do some of this well, and I think that takes some wisdom. And so I don't think mockery should be our default posture. I think we need to be careful, but I don't think it's out of bounds. And so that would be where I don't go. Like that was that John Piper quote that was getting passed around. Well, like, Jesus did, but he's Jesus. Like, how can we mimic? We have sin. It's like, you could apply that to any other action of Jesus, though, and any other virtue that he exemplified. Whatever. And so so there's that, and also, like, why do we not think that meekness can be abused?
Yeah.
So Jesus is meek. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, an orientation to meekness can be abused into man-pleasing and cowardice, right? I mean, and so I talk about that in my recent article of Richard Baxter and Gregory the Great, who wrote they wrote two of the most important treatises on pastoral ministry ever written in the Christian church. And so when I was doing some research for this article, I looked back at some of their writings and kind of how can they challenge us. And they both talked about the temptation to man-pleasing in ministry, and like how we need to be very, very careful, and how that will make us disinclined to say the hard things that need to be said. But okay, so just focusing on mockery, let me read this quote from Herman Bavinck, who
I like Bavinck.
Yeah.
Have you seen pictures of him? Wow, he's a scary looking man.
And but you wouldn't think that he would be, people in the third way winsomeness, they would love Bavinck. But okay, he also spoke to this a little bit. He said, mockery. Not all mockery is wrong, said Bavinck. God himself mocks the idols. Elijah mocked the priest of Baal. Isaiah mocked the idols, and Paul did as well. And then Leland Ryken wrote a commentary on satire, or he wrote an excerpt on satire in one of his writings on kind of different types of discourse in the Bible. He said, look, there's more satire in the Bible than one would guess from standard discussion. Satire, he says, is the exposure through ridicule or rebuke of human vice or folly. And like, look, if you just go read, it's not just Jesus. I mean, Jesus did, so he called the Pharisees whitewashed tombs. I mean, Paul told the Judaizers in the book of Galatians, like, look, they want to cut off your skin, right? And you shouldn't do that now. We don't need to follow that. He's like, look, and if they're going to be serious, why don't they cut it down to the nub, right?
Yeah,
cut it off. Castrate yourselves. Mm-hmm. It's like, so he used mockery as well. So it's not just Jesus. Also, Paul himself was like us, right? Yes. Post Jesus sinner who's saved. And so he also used mockery. And so it's available as a resource to us. And I think it's a resource we shouldn't cut off, because it can be very important to ridicule the ridiculous, to expose folly, to waken up. And let if permit me to read a couple of quotes here, because
Sure,
I
go ahead.
didn't know we were going to talk about this, but I did have these available. I would advise people to follow Ed Feser on Twitter, Feser, and he has written some of the best recent writings on mockery. But listen to this. He says, there are a lot of people, both on the religious side and on the fence, who are so impressed by the absurdly self-confident rhetoric and apparent prestige of anti-Christian thinkers that they suppose there must be something powerful in their arguments. And this supposition will remain even after one has patiently explained the defects in their positions. Sometimes, Feser says, breaking the spell of a powerful rhetorical illusion requires equal and opposite rhetorical force. When you treat an ignorant bully arguing in bad faith as if he were a serious thinker worthy to be engaged respectfully, you only reinforce his prestige and maintain the illusion that he might be onto something, and you thereby make it easier for people to fall into errors that the bully is peddling. And he's like, look, you can't always take a softer touch. Like sometimes a harder touch is going to be required. Even he says like a sort of verbal violence because of the violence that the destruction that these erroneous teachings are inviting others into.
Yep, amen. So I'm a pastor, you know that, and so if my pulpit ministry is just full of mocking and sarcasm, whatever, that would be unhealthy.
Yeah.
But if there's an occasional thing, all right. So, but I do want to mention. You just brought in Bavink and whoever else. What did I want? Oh, yeah. So like the Babylon Bee, which has been kicked off of Twitter for what, like a year now? But it's obvious that among believers and others, there is a hunger for the clarity that comes with some good, sturdy mockery. And I wonder, James, have you seen this lady? Well, I don't know who it is. She calls herself Lacey Jenkins, PhD, on Twitter. Have you seen her?
I think so. Yeah, she's kind of mocking some of the wokeness. Right?
She's hilarious, man. But it makes the point really clearly. It shows you how ridiculous that other position really is. It kind of makes it very clear.
Yeah. So satire, right, historically has been a tool of the powerless, right, to punch up. So here's what I would say: your mockery should punch up, not down. And my friend Brendan Case wrote a really good essay in Church Life Journal for Notre Dame on Pascalian mockery, how Blaise Pascal provides some tips for how to do mockery well. But one of the things he's like, look, mockery should never be a form of bullying or punching down, but a means of making ridiculous those who are abusing their authority.
Good. All right.
But satire has always been like this, right? I mean, it's always been to expose the ridiculousness of those in power, and so I think we should avail ourselves. And so I think the Babylon Bee is trying to do that. She's trying to do that. But yeah, it shouldn't be a punching down, but a punching up.
So let me switch gears a little bit, may I?
Yeah, great.
So here's the question I want to ask, but I'll put a little background before it. But here's where we're going. Can we believers, justify a posture of political activism from the Bible? Are there biblical principles that would lead us to say, yeah, I should get active in politics? Now, here's where I'm coming from with that. So I've been part of the very neutral world thing. I've been very, very much discipled by Tim Keller in this. I've been part of Acts 29, and that whole thing has that whole aura about it. Let's avoid politics. Let's be neither left nor right. Let's avoid hot-button issues for the cause of the gospel. But, man, you just can't do that anymore. And what's happened has made it really possible to see that really wasn't the right position to start with. It might have worked a little bit earlier. It sure doesn't work now. But I've had to struggle for a bit. I think I'm over that struggle. Can we justify a posture of political activism from the Bible? Like, if we can, what would it be? I actually think it's pretty simple. But let's see what you have to say.
No, I'd be interested to hear. Yeah, I mean, I don't have a verse. Because the political arrangements in the biblical situation is very different than a democratic polity where you can exert power through your vote and also, but you could also think about the prophets, right, and speaking to power, and that's a type of political activism, right? Like calling the kings, the rulers, to do justice. And so, like, I don't understand how that itself wouldn't be a type of political activism.
Yes.
Like, you're forgetting the cause of the poor. You're harming the weak and the powerless. Like, that is wrong, and you'll be held to account. And and so that activism was through their prophetic voice, but also we have other tools at our disclosure, like, speaking publicly on issues, voting, rallying things. Like, those are other means. And also, like, the way I define it is, I'm advocating for Christian realism, which is a a stream within the tradition, inspired by Augustine, and then people like Niebuhr, Paul Ramsey, even now Nigel Bigger would be a major Christian realist. But like in that tradition, like you have a limited expectation of politics. Like you don't put all your identity in it. I do not. I don't think politics is going to save the world.
Right.
But so do you want like faith without works is dead. Like go tell your, like James says, to tell your neighbor, go be warm and be filled, like on your own. Like Jesus said, like that isn't, or Paul says, James said, that's not love. That's not faith. And so I view politics as a way we love our neighbors.
That's what I wanted to hear. Go ahead, talk about that.
That's the way that I like, and that's where it's like, look, oh, you're just like trying to secure power and privilege. I'm like, don't be stupid. Like, stop lying. Like you're lying. You're lying. And I'm viewing it as a way to practically love our neighbors, and not just love them in word, but in deed. Yes. And so if babies are being slaughtered, it's immoral for me to, so what's the phrase I use? Oh gosh, you can't love your neighbor if you're being indifferent about the things that destroy them,
that hurt them. Yeah.
Yeah.
So for example, they're doing surgeries. Yeah, they're doing surgeries on kids, on boys and on girls, right?
Exactly.
So how can I love that person? By trying to stop that, right? By doing what I can to bring that to an end. And
that's why I just don't get the David French. I don't see how he doesn't see that. Like, to be honest, like, 'cause he's totally silent on this stuff. Yes. Like on the trans on kids stuff. Like that is evil. Like what? Like kids can't. We say that kids don't have choices. They don't have the rationality to be able to make significant choices before a certain age, right? Before a certain age of development.
Sure.
They can't buy cigarettes.
Yeah.
They can't vote. They can't go to war. They can't drive a car. But they can cut off their genitals
without.
Like, what are we doing here? And I think that's profound parental malpractice. And I think to not seek to stop it is a failure of Christian love.
Is not loving my neighbor. First commandment, love God. Second commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, if somebody's about to cut my parts off, I'm not very happy. Cutting their parts, I shouldn't be very happy either. So yeah, I think so. So here's the thing. So we're gonna have another election in a couple of years here, and there won't be a perfect candidate, will there? There is no perfect candidate.
Well, I haven't seen Jesus on any ballots yet.
Some are more perfect or less perfect than others, but suppose there's no easy choice because there's no perfect candidate, and there's somebody who aligns with our positions on, well, things we're talking about here today. But then there are things in their life. It sounds like I'm describing Trump, doesn't it? I don't mean to. I'm just saying any politician the right puts up there, there's going to be somebody's going to dig for dirt. They're going to find some kind of dirt. What does a Christian do when there's no perfect candidate? What's your suggestion?
Well, they'll have to do what they've always done, is vote for imperfect candidates. So you've never done anything else. So there's that. And yeah, the never Trumpers are going to be never DeSantis, by the way. I think a large chunk. So it shows, I do think it's going to show it never was just about Trump. By the way, that's another prediction I have.
Interesting.
David French clearly hates DeSantis, and he's been pretty vocal about his strong dislike towards DeSantis. And so I think that there's something that indicates to me, which is worth exploring. Anyway, that's a side note. But so yeah, a couple things here. I want to make sure I get to these because they're a little distinct, but they're related to your question. One is, I think we need to think about our vote very differently. Like our vote, I think evangelicals put way too much pressure on their vote and who they vote for, as if the person they vote for, they're making an entire endorsement of this person's life. Like you're not, like your vote is not that. This person isn't a reflection of you. And I think you need to stop thinking about it that way. And a lot of evangelicals do that. And I think a lot of it is because like you're putting your name on something or whatever. But it's like, no, this is a very practical decision. Don't be totally consequentialist, but you are thinking about practical consequences. And so you can't. This person doesn't represent you and all your values. Okay, so that's one thing. And I think we have a hard time thinking about that. So there's that. The other thing is when people say like, a vote for Trump was an immoral choice, and it was a vote against character, and a vote for Biden was a vote for character. A person's policies are also reflective of their character, by the way. So if your policies are baby murder, that's bad character. And I don't care if you don't have mean tweets. And so I think we have a real naivety about the character question. And a lot of evil people could mask bad character through public decorum And I think we need to be much more aware of that. And I think so that those would be a couple of things. So you're going to have to, okay, so those are two. The third thing is you are basically making, not always, but I think you basically often making a choice between the lesser of two evils, and just acknowledge that. That's okay. Like you're trying to nudge society as much as you can, nudge it in the direction of justice and good order. Doesn't mean you're fully going to get it. And so, but I think, so this would be a critique of some Trumpists who like didn't want to at least acknowledge it was a lesser of two evils. They wanted to valorize and say, oh no, he is actually amazing. Like, okay, in some ways, sure, that's fine. But I think we actually could just, if we just said like, yeah, we made a calculated choice. And that's actually how I know most people did vote for Trump. They're like, look, it was about the judges. Yeah. I get it.
I don't like that and that about him, but yeah, if we can get some judges, and we did, he kept his word.
That was, and I didn't think he would, and I was wrong on that.
Nobody thought he would.
So I was wrong on that, and the people who, they were right. And so, but I think if you can at least say, I'm making the choice of a lesser of two evils, and I'm going to recognize that. I think that could go a long way, a little bit.
Yeah.
So.
All right, James, let's bring this around to pastors. I'll mention is this the second or third time I'm mentioning this in this podcast? I'm a pastor, and you've been a pastor, and when we know pastors, we live and move and have our being in God and in His church. So, man, you did this talk. What's the name of it? I'd like everybody to look it up and listen to it. The one on pastors, wolves.
Yeah, it'll get released on the Canon app, I guess. I did it out up in Washington. My friend Chris Wiley's another PCA pastor, and he got the Canon guys to video record it because they've got some nice tech. And so I think it'll be up next week. But
what's the name of it?
The title is Sheep, Wolves, and Fools, and on the perils of a winsome ministry. Man. And it's focused on where winsomeness can go wrong in the realm of ministry. And I use those three terms because I think it helps. And they're three strongly biblical terms. And there's a lot of biblical wisdom about those terms that I think gets missed in the winsome approach to ministry.
You want to talk about any of that? Like what gets missed? What happens here? What goes wrong?
Yes, I've already talked a little bit about the sheep. I'll encourage your listeners to go look up John 10 because that did inspire a lot of my talk, where Jesus is talking about the good shepherd. And so I'll mention maybe something about all three of them. On the sheep thing, like a pastor's job is to seek out lost sheep, right? So I've talked about some of the lost sheep, the refugees that I mentioned. Those are some lost sheep that get missed by the winsome types. But then you also to protect the disciples, the sheep in the fold already. And I think by being too nice to the wolves, let me get to the wolves in a second. By being too nice to false teachers, wolves are false teachers in Scripture. Wolves are one of the easiest things. The imagery of wolves in Scripture is one of the easiest things to identify. They are false teachers in Old Testament and New Testament. So wolves are false teachers that want to have an influence in the flock. And so what Jesus says in John 10 is fascinating. He says, like, look, the good shepherd, the shepherd's supposed to protect the sheep. Wolf wants to come and devour. And if a shepherd lets the wolf in, he says the shepherd is then a hired hand. He's a coward. He's not doing his job. He's a hired hand. And I think, like, look, so wolves are false teachers. And I think a lot of the winsome types, by having too much nuance towards the destructive teachings of the left on race and gender especially, and then on some of the politics issues, they've let wolves in the house. And I think over the last couple of years, a lot of us have felt that. And so I think pastors need to do a better job of just saying no to some of these things. Saying, no, you're not going to bring that into our church.
We're not having that.
But if they do say no, if you do say no, you're going to get called unloving, unwinsome. You're a fundamentalist. And I'm like, look, you need to brace for that stuff. You need to take the hits from the wolves. If you aren't willing to take those hits from the wolves, you're just a hired hand and you're a coward. And not every hired hand is directly a wolf, but if they let the wolves in, they're a hired hand. So that's the wolf stuff. And man, Scripture just go read. I could send a link to some comments about what Scripture says about wolves. It's very harsh.
I like Acts 20 with Paul to the Ephesian elders on the wolves too. Savage wolves will rise up from within and come in from without. Yeah, good stuff. Hey,
go read 2 Peter 2. It's a red pill. I mean, it's like the words that Peter has for wolves are extremely harsh. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, they're not real nuanced, are they?
They're not. No.
So I've got to draw this to a close. I hate to say it because I'd enjoy talking to you for hours here, but maybe we'll have another one some other time and go longer. But here's my final question for you today, James. It is this. What would you say to somebody, maybe they're listening to this, or maybe there's some other influence in their life, and they've just realized, hey, I've been a third way Christian. maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I can't nuance everything so much. Maybe we can't just offer the world their part of the neutral ground and I'll take my part of the neutral ground and we'll all be happy. Maybe I need to be more Petrine, more Pauline in my saying that's evil, that's wrong, say it publicly and so on. What would you say to somebody who just realized they're a third wayer and now they're thinking, maybe that was wrong?
Well, I would say I understand that's what I was. And I don't think it was everything about it was always wrong, as I've mentioned. So you don't need to have some massive repentance or something. Though, if you feel like you platformed destructive voices, right, in your church, especially and people are still being influenced by them, you might need to make some public statements of like, hey, I apologize. Like I shouldn't have done that. And I didn't realize where this would go. So there might be places where people need to, like with J.D. Greer, for instance, when he did the pronoun hospitality stuff, that's a classic, like naivety of winsomeness.
Yes.
But he did correct.
He walked it back.
So, and I'm not going to cynically read into his motives. People have done that. I'm just going to take it at face value. And I'm going to say look, I want to fan more stuff like that into flame. So that's great. Thank you, JD. You needed to do that because that was influencing people. And other people, let's follow the lead, right? Like where you made a mistake, acknowledge in a public way, and it led people down the wrong path. Admit it, say you're wrong, and move. And guess what? Like the Christian faith is profoundly hospitable to sinners who repent.
Oh, that's sweet.
Right. And so it's
sweet.
Okay. And people actually are inspired by that, and they actually are warm up to you. Like they warm up to you as a leader, even when you admit you were wrong. I mean, people love that. They eat it up. Don't do it in a fake way. Don't apologize for things that you don't need to apologize for, or that you don't actually believe you were wrong about. Don't do that, because that's how the woke mob wants to get you, and that's how they beat up they suck your soul. And don't do that. But if you did something wrong and you can honestly admit that, that's great. Do it. And otherwise, there's some really great follow the American Reformer. They're really platforming some great conversations to help us think clearly about how to forge ahead. Don't get I throw a red pill around kind of in a funny way. It's how people talk. Don't get nasty and just mean towards people who don't see it yet, and still walk in the path of Jesus. So, for instance, I thought David French's articles, he wrote 2 of them, maybe 3 against me, but I never tried to come back at him. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt, how he might be reading me and kind of understand it. And we still have to walk in the way of Jesus. We need to be silent before our accuser sometimes, and allow that to hit and still walk in integrity. So you're still going to have to walk in the other ways of Jesus, but you don't have to do it in the naive way that's being pushed on us, I think, by the Winsome approach. So don't correct by then just becoming a jerk. I don't want people to do that.
Don't become a jerk. There's a good bottom line for all this. Hey, so I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you so much for joining me. I want to tell our listeners that you ought to go check out James's talk. You can probably find it in print. I think I did. At the National Conservatism Conference, was that the name of it, in Miami, September of 2022. You should also go read The Limits of Winsome Politics, and then read Sheep, Wolves, and Fools, or find them and listen to them. They're all really great, and they got me to a place very quickly that I thought, man, I'd like to talk to James. So thank you for joining us. Glad I got to talk with you. That's it for today, folks, for Grounded. If you're in the area, the Baltimore area, come visit us at Cornerstone Community Church in Joplin, Maryland. And thanks for watching.